marriage was pretty tumultuous. It was up and down, but ultimately it imploded under its own forces.
During my collegiate years, I really explored what it meant to be agnostic and atheist, and I rejected Christianity entirely. And that resulted in one of the worst periods of my life.
In 2010 to 2011, I deployed to Afghanistan.
I was in a car accident, which led to a painkiller addiction.
Not too long after I found out I was pregnant, my daughter was born stillborn.
I faced a tremendous amount of adversity, pain, and confusion that no child should have to endure.
Due to status issues, my parents and siblings had to go to Honduras for a period of time. I felt so much resentment and anger.
One day, when one of the kids came home, and I had a massive heart attack.
When I got kicked out of Christian school in 7th grade, I turned away from Christ completely.
My grandfather sat me down and said, "I have something to tell you." And he held my hand and he told me that my father had passed away.
So I want to begin this morning with something maybe a little different for you. It's a mass confession, okay? So some of you were raised in church or religious traditions where confession was a thing. Some of you maybe not so much. This one's going to be different, though. This is like one big group, show of hands, kind of mass confession. And I'm going to throw a question out there. And here's the deal, though. My hand's going to be up, so I need you to be honest. Like, don't leave me hanging. And you're in church, so you got to be honest. But here's the question for you. How many of you as a kid or a teen ever forged your parents' signature on something? There we go. There's my people. My people were not here last night, except that people who forge their parents' signature might not always be the most honest people. So I think some of my people were here last night. They just didn't own up to it. But you're loud and proud. Yeah, like a permission slip, or like please excuse John, he was sick last night, actually, or whatever. And I did a lot, sad to say. Got very good at signing my mom's signature. But here, while I'm in a confessing mode, and on a similar vein, here's something you may not know, that people who do what I do, pastors, preachers, priests, religious leaders, Christian authors, conference speakers, we have a habit of forging God's signature to promises God never made. We have a habit of forging God's signature to promises God never made. And I don't want to point fingers. I understand why we do this. I think there's like a pressure, maybe an internal pressure, to put a nice bow, to like attach a happy ending to faith and to things related to faith, like having faith, keeping the faith, that if you do, there are certain guarantees that come with that. And part of why, and I don't mean to blame you, because it's not your fault, but people like that. Church people, they really like that. They want that. They love it. That sells. Like, that sells books. That fills churches. Like, we want to believe that faith and having faith and keeping faith comes with some real world, like this world guarantees. If I, then God. So if I, then God. If I, then God. If I believe right enough and long enough and hard enough, and I'm trying to believe, I'm going to have more faith and true enough, then God will. Or sometimes it's if I do all the right, like, religious things, like there's some formula, some secret formula or combination of the religious things to do, and I check all the right boxes, kind of like a vending machine, I put the right coins in, I pull the right lever, well then God, he must, fill in the blank, he must, after all, he promised, didn't he? Right? And when it doesn't appear that God is keeping his side of the bargain, his side of the equation, or like the vending machine is broken, then oftentimes we kind of lose faith. We pull away from faith and we wonder, where's God? And why didn't God? And maybe he was never really there to begin with. And so today we're right in the middle of a really short 3-part series called Under the Circumstances. And before we just jump in, I want to say it's a short 3-part series. Next week is the finale of the series. And that means the following week we're starting a brand new series that actually I'm kind of excited about. It's called Mind Traps. And we're starting it on Mother's Day weekend. And Scott was just telling you about Mother's Day weekend. It's going to be a great weekend. But we're also starting this new series. And it's a series about how certain ways of thinking, certain ways of certain mindsets, if you will, whether that's anxiety and worry or negativity or anger or cynicism, and a list can just keep going, right? That certain kinds of mindsets can actually become traps that we get stuck in and can't seem to get out of. And I think that's something that all of us can relate to, right? And so that's starting in a couple weeks. I'm excited about that. But again, today we're in part 2 of this series called Under the Circumstances. And the subtitle is Holding On to God when it appears that God is no longer holding on to you. And we are all tempted to jump to conclusions about God, and who he is or isn't based on our circumstances, and to overestimate our ability to interpret our circumstances as signs of God, as telling us something about God, both positive and negative, our circumstances and other people's circumstances. And so when things are just turning out beautifully and it all just worked out perfectly, like, oh, that just must have been God, or like, church people sometimes use this phrase, maybe you've heard this before, that was such a God thing. That was a God thing because it just worked out so amazing. It was perfect. And then when things turn horribly, well, where was God with that? Why did God do that or allow that? And what do I need to do? What do I need to do for God? Like, what religious things maybe do I need to do so that things will turn out right or turn out better? Or maybe I just need to believe. Maybe I just need to believe more and trust God more. And then, of course, there's other people, right? There's other people, and it's turning out like they're getting all my 8 prayers answered. Like, and they're not, can I just be honest, God? They're not even as good of a person. I don't understand why those things turn out well for them. And we've been trying to get pregnant for years, and you're in your small group, and they're like, I prayed one, the Lord just blessed us, and we're pregnant, and you're like, I don't want to be in a small group with you anymore. Like, why do those things happen for them, and what's wrong with me? Or maybe this whole thing isn't real, and you might be in circumstances like that right now. Like, you're trying to hold on to faith, or maybe you're tired of holding on to faith, and it appears that God is not responding, and he is not holding on to you, and things are not getting better. And it's no accident at all that we actually began this series last week on Easter weekend, because that truly was the turning point for the early followers of Jesus, because they saw Jesus die, and it was a horrible, shameful death, and they lost hope, and they lost faith. And then, and nobody was expecting this, as we talked about last week, beginning on Sunday, and for the next 40 days, they began to see him alive, and not just alive, like more alive, like another level of life. They had meals with him, long conversations with him. In fact, our Supernova Kids is commemorating one of those moments, one of those fantastic scenes this week, this Sunday, called Breakfast with Jesus. The story, by the way, parents, is found in John 21, and you might want to read that story sometime today, maybe even with your kids. But they began to see him, and as we said last week, like, that's when they knew. Not before that moment, but then, oh baby, that's when they knew. And I mean knew. They didn't, it's not like that's when they started believing again and, cross our fingers, counterfactual, wishful thinking, like we hope so. That's when they knew that there is more to this life than this life. There is more to this life in this life, both now and beyond this life. And that's when they knew that the Father truly had sent the Son. And that meant that every crazy thing that Jesus had ever said and did about his Father had been validated. And that Jesus truly had represented and demonstrated what God, our Heavenly Father, is like, and what God likes, and what and who God likes. And if that's true, well, then everything was a reversal of all the expectations that we had about God. And that's when they knew that the darkness in this world would not have and does not have the final word, and that our circumstances are not an indicator of God's absence or his apathy. And so, though history tells us, by the way, history, not just the Bible, history tells us that those followers of Jesus would go on to experience unimaginable losses and tragedies and sufferings and injustices and death. They, from that moment, not before, but from that day forward, they leaned in and not away. They pressed in harder. They trusted more. They journeyed forward more boldly, not less. And they never believed that if they were somehow good enough, or if they would just believe enough, that the right things would happen for them and the bad things wouldn't happen. They never believed that. After all, think about it. They had seen the worst thing imaginable happen to the best person they ever knew. They had seen the worst possible thing happen to the most faith-filled and faithful person they had ever known. And they never believed from that moment forward that their circumstances were somehow an indicator of God's absence or his apathy. As we said last week, that the difficult and tragic and messed up circumstances in our lives are not an indicator of God's absence or apathy. Rather, they are an indicator that this world is not the way that it's supposed to be. And Jesus' first followers, this is so huge. They lived with a set of fundamental assumptions about the story that we find ourselves in. And by the way, we all have our own story that we tell ourselves about what's happening in this world, why it's happening, where it comes from, and our place in it. And they had some fundamental assumptions that I believe have been lost to many followers of Jesus over the generations. Like the things that they just believed and felt about the story that we find ourselves in that allowed them, these assumptions allowed them to, on the one hand, embrace the goodness of God, to embrace the redemptive power of God, and at the same time face the darkness of this world and face the painful, tragic, dark circumstances of their own lives as it truly was, to embrace the goodness of God and face the darkness of this world in a way that was real and robust. They had a story, and they had assumptions to that story. And the first of those fundamental assumptions was this: that this world is not the way that it's supposed to be. This world is not the way it's supposed to be. And you have that sense from time to time. You look around and you just go, this is messed up. This should not be this way. That the world, as we see it, the world that we live in now is not the world as God created it to be. And one of the questions that gets asked often, and I've heard people, like some of you have asked this as well, it's a great question. The question goes like this: hey, if there's a God, and if God is good, if he's truly good, and if God is truly powerful, then why didn't God create a world that is good? And the answer is, he did. He did. In fact, their story opens with a creator who is brilliant and wise and powerful and good, and he creates everything that can be seen and everything that can't be seen. And then he steps back from all that he's done, surveying all that he made, and there's this great line in the opening of the story that God saw all that he had made, and it was, say these two words out loud with me, it was what? Very good. Very good. How much of it was very good? All. It was very good. And God created a very good world, and he populated it with beings who were designed to exist as God himself exists, in total oneness and unity with himself. The word for this, by the way, that they used was the word shalom. Shalom is like peace, it's wholeness, it's oneness, unbroken unity with each other, and with creation itself, and with God. Created in the image of God, the story says, these beings were to rule over creation as his representation, designed for love, for unmitigated attachment with one another, self-giving, authentic, healthy love, designed for, I love this word, efficacy, that we are designed, not as robots, not as puppets, not as slaves to our DNA, or slaves to our circumstances, or slaves to history, as agents of meaningful cause and effect. We are designed for efficacy, to be actors in this world in a way that is meaningful, which implies the freedom to do so, and the freedom to do so meaningfully, designed for love, designed for efficacy, and designed for glory, designed to be glorious. That there is a depth, there is a nobility, a dignity, a beauty to what it means to be human. And honestly, I think this part of the story isn't spoken of enough. It could be spoken of all the time, because it's this part of the story that I think explains things that are deeply true about who we are and how we are, from our neural wiring to our emotional makeup, and why we are the way we are, and why things go wrong with us the way they do. Aspects of our experience, of human experience, like morality and moral beauty and meaning, things that this part of the story explains, things that are deeply true of all of us, that God created a good and glorious world, and the residue of that, it's still there. It's still there. It's still out there. It's still in here. But this world is not that world. And according to the story, whether to understand this literally or metaphorically, the human beings that were the images of God in creation rebelled against God, and we went our own way. And as a result, the shalom, the oneness, the wholeness, the unity of all things was fractured, and God's good creation became broken and diseased and disfigured. A darkness, an ancient darkness entered the story, and a disease, a type of disease, infected the entire created order. And the word for that disease in the story is often a word that we translate sin. Capital S, like this is everything that's messed up with us, everything that's messed up in this world, and it has infected the entirety of the created order. In fact, Paul, the great apostle Paul, he's one of the early followers of Jesus. He's riffing on this ancient story in a letter that he wrote to followers of Jesus in the capital of the empire itself, Rome, and he has this line. He says, "For the creation, the whole of creation was subjected to frustration." The creation was subjected to frustration like famine, earthquakes, birth defects, sickness, war, racism, genocide, death, disease, DNA, like genetic diseases, hate, like all that the disease has infected not just all of the human experience. That disease is now part of creation's experience. This is not the way it was supposed to be. This is not the way it's supposed to be. And because of that, we can never simply conclude that the things that are happening in our lives or in the world are somehow God's will, as if God's will is always done on earth as it is in heaven, because the truth is we now live in a part of the story. We now live in a world where more often than not, God's will is not done on earth as it is in heaven. And the world, as a result, has become this crippled, messed up, broken place where darkness often seems to reign, even unchallenged. But this is key. And Easter convinced them of this more than anything. They already believed it, and then came Easter, and then they knew it. It will not always be this way. It may not be the way it's supposed to be, but it will not always be this way. And someday, they had always believed this, someday, God will intervene, and he will intervene fully and finally. And this version of the world and this version of history would come to an end, and God would establish the kingdom of God on earth as it is in heaven. There would be a new or renewed creation. All things would be made new, and heaven and earth would be rejoined together, and everything broken in this world would be restored, and everything wrong would be made right. In fact, this is the picture, this is the image that the great prophet John is painting in his famous, or maybe infamous document known as Revelation, this epic apocalyptic masterpiece that he's winding this narrative in this beautiful and brilliant way, and as he reaches the end of this narrative, he begins to paint this picture as heaven and earth are coming back together, as God and creation and humanity are being reunited together again in shalom. And here's one of the ways he puts it. He says, "And I heard a loud voice from the throne saying, 'Look, everybody, look. God's dwelling is now with people.'" In other words, heaven and earth are coming back together again. God and humanity and creation are being rejoined, and he will dwell with them. Next slide, next verse. "And he will," I love this, "he will wipe away every tear from their eyes as everything wrong is being made right. And there will be no more death," because death is part of what is messed up and broken with this world, and it is not the way that it's supposed to be. "And no more mourning or crying or pain, for that old order, it has passed away. And the one who was seated on the throne said, 'Look, I am making everything new.'" And here's the story that they believed they found themselves in, that this world as it is now is not the way it was supposed to be, and it will not always be this way. But the real difference that Friday and Sunday made, the real difference that weekend we celebrated last weekend of Good Friday and Easter Sunday made in their understanding of the story, and it was something nobody had seen. It had inserted this radical, unforeseen twist in the plot that someday had actually begun. that someday, that day when everything would be made right, that it had actually already begun in the present, that Jesus, who referred to him, we saw last week, referred to himself as the resurrection and life, which is a crazy thing to say, unless you can back it up. And he's saying, I am that future day when there will be a resurrection and there will be life for like the age to come. I am that day here and now in the present. And they believed that Jesus had somehow brought the future, the age to come into this present world, partially, though not fully and finally, that the kingdom of God had already been established on earth like a mustard seed, tiny and starting to grow and spread throughout the garden. That new creation was actually beginning, and it was beginning one person at a time. In fact, Paul, again, the Apostle Paul, who I cited just a moment ago, in another letter to the Greek city of Corinth, Christians there, he says, he puts it this way: if anyone belongs to the Messiah, if anyone joins themselves to the Messiah, that's the new creation. That's the new creation right there, one person at a time. The old has gone, and look, the new is here. And they believed that somehow new creation was actually beginning in the old creation and that they were a part of it. And it's this third part of the story that gave them their sense of their place in the story and what they were actually doing here. And it was that story and that worldview that allowed them, and in fact empowered them, to embrace the goodness of God and the redemptive power of God, and at the same time face the darkness of this world and the darkness of the circumstances in their own lives as they truly were. They did not believe that God had ever promised them in a world gone wrong that if they do the right thing, right things will happen. In fact, they expected quite the opposite. And they did not confuse their circumstances with how God feels about them or how God feels about us or how he feels about you and how much he loves you and is for you and wants to work in you and with you and through you in your circumstances to challenge the darkness and actually even transform it. But, and this is important, that is all not to say that none of the early Jesus followers were tempted to look at their circumstances and wonder about God and wonder if God was actually there, or maybe wonder if they had somehow gotten it wrong. And so there's a letter. It's actually more than a letter, it's a written speech. So it's a genre of letter writing that was kind of new on the scene right in the first century. It was kind of their version of podcasting, okay? So if a guy stands up or a lady stands up, gives a speech, it's like, this is this crowd, but how do we get this to other people? And so they began writing speeches, and they're written to be delivered like a speech, and this is one of them. So this is a letter or a written speech in the documents that are known as the New Testament. And this particular written speech is written to a community or a number of communities of Jewish followers of Jesus in the city of Rome, right in a moment where Christians, and especially Jewish Christians, were experiencing extreme opposition and extreme difficulty from their neighbors and from the empire itself. In fact, history tells us a whole lot about this moment, not just the Bible. And it's the kind of situation where just any observer, like any of their neighbors, might look at their circumstances and say, yeah, like, buddy, the gods are definitely not on your side. Like, whatever you got going on, whatever God it is you're worshiping, definitely not happening for you right now. Like, you're doing something wrong. You've got something wrong. And they were very much tempted to look at their circumstances and conclude that those were indicators that God was somehow absent or angry or apathetic, and to pull back or even walk away from faith, as you yourself might be feeling or might have felt at times in your life. And so throughout this letter, throughout this speech, the speaker or the author, if you will, is challenging them, really pleading with them to lean in and not away, that their circumstances are not an indicator of God's anger or absence or apathy, and that God is with them and for them, and that they are part of a story that's bigger than they can imagine. And then towards the end of the letter, the writer begins to retell the history of their people through the Hebrew scriptures, the stories of men and women who trusted God and actually acted on that confidence, like put one foot in front of the other in spite of their circumstances, in spite of how things appeared for them. And he's telling story after story. There's so many stories, like there's so many of them, so many key figures in this long history. And he begins with what they call Torah, starting from the document we refer to as Genesis. And he's like, this person and that person. And then he's like, this is going to take, I don't have time for this. Like, this is going to take forever. We don't have room on this scroll for this. And so he begins summarizing. And this is so important. It's so important for those who are maybe struggling and wondering about God and faith, for those who've maybe suffered and even lost faith or some of it. For all of us, really important for all of us, because we all live in a world where things are not the way they are supposed to be. And so we're picking up in the middle of his history lesson. And here's what he says, like, I don't even have time. So he's like, we're going to run out of room. We're going to run out of time to tell you about. And he's just like, this is how he pushes fast forward on the remote. Here it is. Gideon, Barak, Samson, Jephthah. Oh man, then there's like David. And don't get me started on Samuel and the prophets who through faith conquered kingdoms, administered justice, gained what had been promised, who, dig this, who shut the mouths of lions, quenched the fury of flames, escaped the edge of the sword, whose weakness was turned into strength, who became powerful in battle and routed foreign armies. And we're like, that's awesome. That is fantastic. Like, that's where I want to live. Like, that's the sweet spot, baby. Crushing it, right? Hashtag winning every single day. And we love those days, don't we? Like, we love those seasons of our lives when it feels like we're doing the right things and right things are just clicking for us. That is all. Let's keep that rolling. Let's hear some more of those stories. Yeah, let's keep going. And there were others who were tortured. It's like, wait, what? That's not hashtag winning. Yeah, refusing to be released, refusing to recant and get released so that they might gain an even better resurrection in the future, unwilling to give up God's future for them in order to have a better or easier present. In other words, yeah, there were other people who did not have a happy ending in this part of the story. Some, he goes on to say, faced jeers and flogging, chains and imprisonment. They were put to death by stoning. They were sawed in two. They were killed by the sword. They went about in sheepskin and goatskin because they had nothing, because they were so poor, because things didn't go right and they weren't prospering, destitute, persecuted, mistreated. And we're like, well, they must not have been living right. They must not have been believing right or trusting the promises, because God clearly was not on their side. He had abandoned them, or maybe they had abandoned him. And the writer's like, no, it's actually just the opposite. He says, this world, this fallen world, it was not worthy of them. This fallen world wasn't even worthy of them. They endured in spite of. They trusted in spite of. They believed that God was up to something even though they could not see it and may never see it in their own lifetimes, but somehow they were part of it, and so they were going to do the next right thing just because. And he says, these were all commended for their faith. Oh, they had faith. They had all, not their beliefs, by the way. Not their beliefs. They were commended for their confidence in God, their trust, their willingness to act upon that confidence in spite of. They were commended for their faith, yet none of them received what had been promised. That in fact, God had promised something. God had promised something in the future, that he was going to do something, and everything else that they had experienced through their part of the story was just like an appetizer, just a foretaste of what God was going to do, because God had planned something that has now begun. It has now begun like Jesus, the Messiah, has brought the future that God had planned, that we were hoping for, into the present. He had planned something better for us, so that only together with us would their story be brought to completion. Only together, them and us, would the story be brought to perfection, if you will. In other words, he's saying, guys, and he's speaking to people who are inclined to lean away from God in the middle of the circumstances. He's like, no. We, you, plural, us together, we are part of something that's bigger than us, that's better than us, that's better than you and bigger than you. And then he says, this is beautiful, he says, therefore, since we are surrounded by such an amazing cloud of witnesses, he starts to change the picture he's painting to this image of a sports arena. and there's a sporting arena, and all these heroic men and women who trusted in spite of, who acted in spite of, who leaned into God instead of away, even though their circumstances were so awful. They are now like the spectators in the arena. They're in the stands, and we are on the arena floor, and they are all watching us, and they're leaning out of their seats, or maybe they're standing and starting to cheer, and they're watching to see what we're going to do with what they had been a part of. And so he's like, since they're the ones who are watching you right now, since they're the ones who are cheering us on, what are we going to do with it? He's like, here's what we're going to do. We are going to let us throw off everything that hinders, like anything and everything that gets you all wrapped up, that gets you all tangled up. Don't miss our Mind Trap series starting in 2 weeks. Everything that gets in your head that messes up your journey, and the sin. The sin, referring to that disease that had entered all of creation and affects everything that's messed up in us, everything that's messed up in me, everything that we mess up, everything that's messed up in the world, all that stuff, it messes up your journey, and we know that's true. He says, you take that gets all tangled up in you, and you begin to actively discard it, and if you're like me, it's like repeatedly discard it over and over and over again, like you get rid of that, and like an athlete, like you go lean, and you go mean, and you strip all that off of you, so that we can run with perseverance the race marked out for us, or literally the race that is set before us, because there's a race that's marked out for us collectively. There's a race that's in front of us right now and our generation in this moment, and there's a race that's marked out for you individually and personally. There's a race that's marked out. There's a race in front of you right now, a race that's in front of me right now, that it's a race that's mine and mine alone to run. Other people can encourage me on it, pick me up when I stumble, but that's a race that's in front of me, and there's a race in front of you. And it may not be a race that you would have chosen. It might not be a track that's in front of you right now that you would have wished upon yourself, but it's the race that's in front of you right now, and it's a race that will require, and you know this already, it will require endurance, it's gonna require grit, it's gonna require determination to run it well, it's gonna require a certain kind of focus in your life. And so here's what he says next: run with perseverance the race marked out for us, fixing our eyes. Like, what are you going to focus on in this race? Fixing our eyes not on our circumstances. Fixing our eyes not on the people who hurt you, the things that have gone wrong in your life. Fixing our eyes not on that diagnosis, not on the things that you've lost, not all of the things, fixing your eyes not on all of the things that have gone wrong. And maybe they've gone wrong in spite of the fact that you were doing the right thing. Maybe even because you were doing the right thing, you felt like, I don't get it because I felt like I was doing what God wanted me to do, and things have turned out so wrong for me. Fixing your eyes not on all of the darkness in this messed up world, and there is a lot of it. And oh yeah, you see it. You might be fully aware of it. It's in your peripheral, absolutely. It's there, but that is not where you fix your eyes. That is not where you focus your eyes. He says, fixing our eyes on Jesus. Now, that's not preacher talk. That's not church talk. Like, well, of course, like preacher, you're going to say that. Like, you got to fix it. And here's why it's more than that. Here's why this is more than just a religious platitude. Here's what he goes on to say. Fix your eyes on Jesus, the pioneer and the perfecter of our faith. The pioneer, meaning the beginning of it, the starting point and the finisher, the one who, fix your eyes on the one who blazed that path before you, who has himself walked that very path of struggle and suffering and everything going wrong. You fix your eyes on the one who has suffered before you, walked that path himself, and now waits for you at the finish line at the end of it all. And here's the author's point. He's saying, you fix your eyes on Jesus, not on your circumstances. Fix your eyes on Jesus, not on your circumstances. And again, that's not just preacher talk, and that's not just religious talk. This is how you stay the course. This is how you run the race that's in front of you right now, and you run it well, and you become better over time and not bitter. This is how you lean in and you lean forward, and this is how you experience the sustaining grace and power and presence of God in the midst of circumstances that you did not choose and would not have chosen for yourself. And then he says something that we can't even imagine, because we have never actually seen a crucifixion. Not in real life. Even the brutality of Mel Gibson's Passion of the Christ could not truly capture the horror and the shame and the disgust of a crucifixion. And he says, let me tell you something. Let me remind you something about our pioneer, about the tip of the spear. Let me remind you of something about him, who for the joy set before him endured the cross. And like, yeah, you guys have had to endure some stuff. Absolutely. You've had to endure some things that have made you wonder about God, some things that have made you wonder about this world. He says something about the pioneer, the tip of the spear, that I don't think anybody had ever said about a crucified person before, and probably no one has ever said about a crucified person since. For the joy set before him. What? For the joy set before him, for the joy of what would be on the other side, he endured the cross. I love this next line. This next line is so punk rock. It's so awesome. He says, for the joy set before him, endured the cross, scorning its shame. Scorning its shame. It's like a show of contempt for the shame of the cross. He's like, is that all you've got? Is that all you've got? When you see what's on the other side of this for all of humanity, when you see what this accomplishes, I'm telling you, what you got, this is nothing. Scorning, his joy set before him, endured the cross, scorning its shame, and sat down at the right hand of the throne of God, vindicated, victorious through, and now on the other side of. And then the writer says two powerful words, and he's drawing them back in. He says, listen. Consider him. Consider him, or maybe for you, reconsider him. Reconsider him again, possibly for the first time. And I say this from time to time. These documents, many of these that we're quoting, were written in ancient Greek. They weren't written in English or written in English. We translate them into English. And he uses this term here. It's a little bit unusual. Analogisthei. It's a little bit different than the normal word for think about or consider something. It's got like a little bit of an exclamation point on it, like a little added juice to it. And it's like think deeply about this. Like really think about him. Like I've taught, like fix your eyes on him, but then stop and go, well, wait a minute. Let me ponder on this for a moment. Let me reflect on, consider him who endured such opposition from sinners, such opposition from this messed up, broken world and from the messed up, broken people in this world, even though he was doing the right thing. In fact, precisely because he was always just doing the right thing, who blazed this very path himself before you, who has walked that path himself and now waits for you at the finish line with arms open wide. You consider him who endured such opposition. And here's why. So that you will not grow weary and lose heart or lose faith. Consider him. And now here's the invitation. And he gives us this earlier in the letter. He says, so let us approach. Come on guys, let us approach God's throne of grace with confidence. And we can approach God's throne with confidence because, as we said last week, if Jesus demonstrates what God is truly like, if Jesus accurately demonstrated and reflected what your Heavenly Father is like, then you can be confident that God is with you and for you. He is with us and for us in our weakness, frankly, in our failures, in our struggle, and certainly in our pain, and that God's throne, the seat of his power, the center of his authority, in fact, at the center of everything, God's throne truly is a throne of grace. So let us approach God's throne of grace with confidence. And here's the real promise. Here's a promise that God actually did sign his name to, so that we may receive mercy and find grace to help us in our time of need. Mercy is an emotional word. Mercy is like compassion. It's sometimes even translated pity, though that's a negative thing in our culture. It's like when your heart just bleeds for somebody, when you feel yourself emotionally moved towards them, that God weeps with you and moves emotionally towards you in your pain and in that loss and the pain of this world, that we may receive mercy and find grace, sustaining grace, strength and fortitude to endure, like to lean in, and in fact, do the next right thing in spite of the ways that it's not working out, without giving in to the temptation of despair or cynicism. Mercy and grace to help us in our time of need. In fact, I would love us to read this verse, this line out loud together with us from the beginning. Will you read that with me? Let's say this out loud together. Let us then approach God's throne with confidence so that we may receive mercy and find grace to help us in our time of need. And again, that's not just talk. That's not just religious platitudes, because it sounds like it could be. It's real. And one of the reasons why I know it's real is because I know some of your stories. I know some of you who've experienced this. Against your own wishes, things happened in your life and you leaned in and not away. In fact, throughout this room, there are men and women. Like there's this cloud of witnesses who've experienced that God's sustaining grace in extraordinary circumstances that you didn't wish for and wouldn't wish on others. And I thought for a moment, about ending by asking, like, if that's you, to stand together kind of as a witness to that, kind of as your own like testimony to that, if you will. And then I thought, well, these are precisely the people who were in my mind who wouldn't want to draw attention to themselves because it wasn't in the end really something about them or something they had. It was something that was done with them and through them. And then at the same time, I thought, throughout the room, there are people who wonder about that. There are people who honestly are needing that right now and perhaps wondering if it is true, or perhaps hoping that it is real and that it is possible. And so instead of having one group or another group stand, I've decided to do something a little different as we end. I've asked Christian to come and lead us in a reprise of that song that we sang earlier. And as a response to this invitation, what I'd like to do instead is ask us to all stand. So I want to ask you to stand regardless of where you are at on the spectrum of all of that. Maybe you are someone who's experienced it. Maybe you're someone who's not even sure it's real. And as a response to this invitation that we just read, as we re-sing just a little bit of the song, and it might be your affirmation of something that you so deeply believe, like a reality that you've experienced, or a reaffirmation of that, the sustaining grace, the sustaining of goodness of God, and you're like, I have seen that. I know that that's real. Or it might be your aspiration. It might be like, I'd love to think that's possible. I'm not even sure if I believe it. I want that. I need that right now. So wherever you are on the continuum of that, in fact, wherever you are even on the continuum of your own spiritual journey, I want to invite us all to sing this song and to approach God's throne of grace with confidence so that we might receive mercy and find grace to help us in our time of need. Let's sing together. Your goodness is running after me. Your goodness is running after me. With my life laid down, I surrender now. Give you everything. Your goodness is running after me. Your goodness is running after me. Your goodness is running after me. With my life laid down, surrender now. I give you everything. Your goodness is running after me. And all my life you have been faithful. And all my life you have been you're so good. With every breath that I am able, I will sing of the goodness of God.
And all my life you have been faithful. And all my life you have been so good. With every breath that I am able, I will sing of the goodness of God.
Hey, I'd like to pray for us and really pray for you as we wind down this time. Lord, in the midst of our circumstances, we want to believe, we want to hold on to this promise, God, that we can draw near to you, that we can have the confidence of doing so. And so we want to really like fix our eyes, fix all of our hope, not on our circumstances, but on you. And as we seek to draw near to you, I pray that we would see more of your grace and your mercy just extended to us. God, I pray that we would understand that our circumstances are never an indicator, God, of your absence in our lives or your apathy towards us, but we would sense your goodness and your love and your presence with us every day of our lives. We ask this in Jesus' name. Amen.